It is 0414 hours local time, and the Voronezh missile production plant is already a wall of fire. This was one of the most important links in Russia's chain for building Kh-101 cruise missiles and Iskander-K systems, the same weapons Moscow keeps firing at Kyiv and Odessa from hundreds of miles away. Now the missiles meant for the next attack on Ukraine were burning inside the very halls that built them, turned into blackened scrap on Russian soil before a single one had left the ground. And what stunned Moscow was not the scale of the strike, but how little it took. No bomber formation, no barrage of cruise missiles, just 2 F-16S trailing electronic ghosts and 16 small propeller drones, each worth less than a used car, threading through layer after layer of air defense to reach a site the Kremlin had treated as untouchable. The question that would haunt Russian commanders by daybreak was quieter and far more painful. How did an entire S-400 network end up firing millions of dollars at nothing at all? At 0123 hours local time, at a concealed launch site outside Sumy, the darkness broke only with the flat, patient sound of small engines turning over one after another. 16 FP-1 drones lifted off the rails in sequence, 30 seconds apart, and vanished into the night heading east. They carried none of the menace of a fighter or the raw speed of a cruise missile. Each was a modest, long-range, one-way attack UAV worth around $50,000, less than a used car, built to fly roughly 1,000 miles into Russian territory and reach places Moscow had long treated as beyond reach. That modesty was not a weakness, it was the entire point. The moment they cleared the launch area, the flight computers pushed the formation down. The drones settled to about 220 feet above the ground and held there, skimming over plowed fields, tree lines, river channels, and the long, dark stretches of open country running toward Voronezh. They were not trying to outrun Russian radar, they were trying to stay beneath its attention, flying low, flying slow, flying quiet, and letting the curve of the Earth do most of the hiding for them. Here the physics worked against the defenders. A ground-based air defense radar is powerful when it searches the high sky where a target stands cleanly against empty air, but a small object creeping along at 220 feet sits down in the clutter. Hills, buildings, tree canopies, the scattered returns thrown back by the terrain itself. To a radar operator, an FP-1 at that altitude was not a clear contact. It was a flicker that might be a drone, might be a truck on a road, might be nothing at all. And every second the crew spent deciding was a second the swarm kept flying. Inside each airframe, an inertial navigation unit counted the aircraft's own motion, every turn, every drift of the wind, and corrected the route without ever asking a satellite where it was. Anti-jamming positioning filled in the rest. That independence mattered because it meant the formation did not depend on a signal Russia could reach out and cut. As long as the drones knew how far they had traveled and which way they had turned, they could keep threading the gaps in the defensive network on their own. But 16 slow drones, however quiet, were never going to break the shield around Voronezh by themselves. The plant did not sit exposed. It sat behind long-range radar, close-in missile batteries, and electronic warfare systems, all backed by the fighters at Baltimor Air Base a short hop away. To punch a hole through that, the FP-1s needed the defenders looking the wrong way at the exact moment they slipped closest. They needed a distraction loud enough and convincing enough to make an entire air defense network turn its eyes toward the sky and away from the ground. That distraction was already airborne. At 0345 hours local time, well inside Ukrainian airspace and never crossing into Russia, an F-16 Block 70/72 under the call sign Mirage banked into position. It was not there to bomb anything. On its wings hung AGM-158 anti-radiation missiles, weapons built to home in on the radar emissions of an air defense battery, and their mere presence was meant to force the Russians into a choice. Turn your radars on and risk being hunted, or keep them dark and go blind. But the real deception was not the fighter at all. It was what Mirage released a moment later into the dark. A pair of MALD decoys, small air-launch devices that carry no warhead and do only one thing: mimic the radar return of a full-size aircraft. To the sensors ringing Voronezh, two modest little pods suddenly bloomed into the signature of a strike package pressing in at 30,000 feet. Picture the problem from inside an S-400 Triumf battery that morning. In front of you sits a critical missile plant. Behind you sits Baltimor Air Base. And onto your screen climbs a pair of large, high, loud contacts bearing straight out of Ukraine. High altitude, strong returns, exactly the shape of the raid you have been told to expect. Everything about them says engage now. On paper, the S-400 was built precisely for this. Its long-range surveillance radar can reach out hundreds of miles, its fire control channels can track many targets at once, and its interceptors can pull down aircraft at the far edge of the sky. Layered behind it, the S-350 filled the medium band. Against a genuine squadron at 30,000 feet, this was close to an ideal engagement, the target flying high, clean, and cooperative, standing out against empty air the way the system's designers had always drawn it. But that strength was exactly the lever Ukraine meant to pull. A radar tuned to kill things in the high sky has no way to know that the fat, obvious contact filling its screen is a hollow shell with no aircraft behind it. The MALD did not need to survive. It did not need to be clever. It only needed to look real for the 90 seconds it took a battery commander to lock, confirm, and fire. This was the Matador's cape drawn across the bull's vision, bright, close, and utterly convincing, while the blade waited somewhere else entirely. The launch order came. 6 interceptors, each worth roughly $2 million, tore off their rails and climbed into the darkness after the 2 ghosts. They flew true. They flew, but they found nothing but the decoys that had lured them, burning down through empty air after signatures that had never carried a warhead. $12 million of missiles spent in under a minute, and not one of them pointed anywhere near the 16 FP1s still skimming the fields at 220 feet, quietly closing the last stretch toward the plant while every radar that mattered stared the wrong way. By 0358 hours local time, the 16 FP1s had closed to within 10 miles of the plant, and here Ukraine's plan turned on its head. Until now, the swarm had lived by staying invisible. But as it reached the inner ring, the drones did the opposite. They climbed deliberately just high enough for the short-range radars to catch them clean. It looked like a blunder. It was an invitation. Waiting for them was the plant's last line, Panzer S-1 and Tor M2, the close-in point defense batteries built to swat down exactly the low, small threats the outer rings were designed to miss. The Panzer pairs a tracking radar with surface-to-air missiles and a pair of 2 A38M autocannons. The Tor M2 adds vertically launched interceptors tuned for low-altitude work. On paper, these are the goalkeepers, the systems that catch whatever slips past everything upfield. Against a handful of drones, they should have been more than enough. But a point defense battery has one hard limit that no radar upgrade can fix. It can only prosecute so many targets at once, and it must decide in real time which contact to shoot first. That decision is cheap when there is one drone. It becomes crushing when there are 16 arriving from slightly different bearings, each demanding a track, a priority, a firing solution. The 2 A38M cannons could throw 5,000 rounds a minute into the sky, but only along one line of fire at a time. Every barrel swung onto one drone was a barrel not covering the next. So the batteries did what saturation forces them to do. They fired. Missiles left the Panzer rails, cannons opened up, and the night over Voronezh filled with tracer arcs, radar sweeps, and clipped commands as the crews worked through the swarm one contact at a time. Some FAP-1s went down. It did not matter. Each one that drew fire was a few more seconds the battery spent looking up and out at cheap propeller drones, their radars locked on the loudest, nearest threats in front of them. And that was the whole purpose of the climb. The FP-1s were never the knockout blow at this stage. They were the second cape, drawn even closer to the bull than the first. The plant's final defensive ring was now fully committed, ammunition burning down, tracks saturated, every operator's attention pinned on the small aircraft screaming in low over the perimeter, which meant no one was watching the quiet corridor 50 miles out where the second F-16 had been holding since the raid began. Dark, patient, and still carrying every weapon it came with. 50 miles out, the second F-16 finally moved. Where Mirage had been all noise and provocation, this one, call sign Ghost, had done nothing but wait low and dark since the raid began. Now, with the outer rings chasing phantoms and the inner ring emptying its magazines at propeller drones, the pilot flipped back the cover on the weapons panel. Slung beneath the wings were 4 AGM-158 JASSM cruise missiles, the quiet counterpart to everything loud that had come before. The JASSM is not a bomb dropped and forgotten. Each one costs around $1.2 million, reaches out roughly 200 miles, cruises just under the speed of sound at Mach 0.8, and drives a nearly 1,000-pound penetrating warhead into whatever it finds. Its body is faceted and coated to scatter radar energy, so its return is a fraction of a real aircraft's, a smudge, not a contact. And crucially, it does not need a man on a stick guiding it. It flies on inertial guidance and a stored digital map, then switches to an imaging infrared seeker in the final seconds to pick out the exact shape it was sent to kill. That last detail was the trap inside the trap. Russia could jam every frequency around Voronezh. And near Baltimor Air Base, the electronic warfare crews were already trying. But jamming works against a weapon that has to ask where it is. The JASSM never asked. Its route was baked in before launch. Its seeker was hunting a heat and shape signature the factory could not switch off. You cannot jam the outline of an assembly hall. You cannot scramble the position of a component warehouse that has stood in the same concrete footprint for years. 4 missiles dropped from Ghost's pylons. Their stub wings snapped out, engines lit, and they sank toward the terrain, threading the very radar gaps the swarm and the decoys had pried open. Ahead of them, the plant sat exactly as Ukraine needed it. Every defensive layer committed somewhere else, every operator staring at the wrong threat. At 04:12 hours local time, the last 90 seconds began. Inside the complex, red warning lights ran along the corridors as technicians scrambled to cut power and seal the workshops. The evacuation order came, far too late. A missile plant does not empty in 90 seconds, and the assembly lines, the guidance stores, the test bays, and the half-finished Kh-101 and Iskander-K airframes could not simply vanish. They were fixed, mapped, and waiting. The first JASSM punched through the roof of the main assembly hall and detonated inside. Overpressure crushed partition walls and folded steel racks where cruise missile bodies had sat in line. The second drove into the component warehouse. Guidance units, circuit boards, test rigs, and the shelving erupted, cable trays catching within seconds. Flame climbed and a black column began to rise over the plant. Then the third found the storage bay holding missiles waiting for final assembly. And this was the blow that mattered. The strike was only the spark. What followed was chemistry, fuel, propellant, and high-energy components feeding one another. Temperature racing upward, pressure trapped between concrete walls until the building itself became a furnace. The secondary detonation tore the roof open in a white-orange ball that lit the whole industrial zone. The fourth struck the support and power area, and the fires simply walked. Down pipe runs through smaller workshops into pressure cylinders that added their own blasts to the chain. In the Ukrainian command center, there was no cheering, only clipped reports through the headsets. Assembly line down, warehouse burning, support area gone. The missiles built to fly toward Ukrainian cities had died in the room that made them, and none of them had traveled a single foot. The consequences of that morning were not measured only in the smoke rising over Voronezh. Militarily, Ukraine had not intercepted a wave of missiles in flight. It had reached back and struck the place those missiles were born. The main assembly hall, the guidance component stores, and the bays holding half-finished Kh-101 and Iskander-K airframes were gutted in a single pass. According to reporting after the strike, the damage ran deeper than the burned workshops. The semiconductor and diode lines feeding not only the Kh-101 and Iskander-K, but the Pantsir S-1 as well, were disrupted, and skilled engineers and technicians, the hardest loss of all to replace, were among the casualties. A cruise missile can be rebuilt in weeks. The people in the supply chain that build it cannot. Strategically, this was an attack on capacity, not just on hardware. Every battery Moscow now pulls back to guard an industrial site is a battery no longer standing over the front. Every production line forced dark is a stream of missiles that will never reach Kyiv or Odessa. Ukraine did not need to win the war in a single night over Voronezh. It only needed to slow the rhythm, to make each missile costlier, later, and less certain than the one before it. And that is the quieter lesson of this operation. A missile does not have to be destroyed in the final dive toward its target. It can be defeated long before it ever leaves the ground, in the room that assembled it. For Moscow, the message was plain. The factories deep inside Russia are no longer the untouchable rear they were built to be. What decided it? The F-16 Decoys, the low-flying FP-1s, or the JASSM that never had to ask where it was? Leave your thoughts below. And if you stand for peace and Ukraine's sovereignty, like, subscribe, and follow the next analysis.